Okay, so if you were listening to the lecture from last week, we talked about experience providers, and number one was communications. So if you look at the uh, great campaign put together by Costa Rica, for instance, this is a great example of communications.
Looking for a tropical paradise to visit for your next vacation? We've got just the place. Welcome to Mojo Travels, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 reasons to visit Costa Rica. Are you a fan of our videos? Be sure to subscribe to Mojo Travels and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. For this list, we're looking at some of the amazing things this Central American country has to offer. Number 10, it's a relatively safe destination. Whether you're traveling alone, with friends, or with family, safety is a very important factor when it comes to traveling. Luckily, Costa Rica is one of the safest countries to visit in Central America. As a politically stable nation with no military, Costa Rica is a nation with a peaceful presence. Even their crime involving tourists is one of the lowest among the Central American countries. That's not to say there's none, of course. Always check for travel advisories before you plan a trip. As long as you don't tempt thieves by leaving your valuables out in the open and watch where you go, you shouldn't have trouble. Number 9, unique attractions. A visit to this tropical paradise will also give you a chance to see some unique sights and experiences. Walk across the Genius River Bridge, a bridge made entirely out of confiscated gear of illegal shark poachers. Climb El Árbol Hueco, a secret climbing tree made out of a series of zigzag trees, or gaze upon the mysterious Diquis spheres, large, ancient round rocks that were discovered in the 1930s. No one knows how or why they were made, but they're estimated to be at least 400 years old. One thing's for sure, Costa Rica is full of hidden gems. Number 8, great coffee. What better way to start off a day of exploring than with a delicious cup of Costa Rican coffee? Here you'll find a plethora of options for that cup of brew since Costa Rica is home to not one, but 8 growing regions that produce their own distinct flavor of coffee. And the country is not only known for their variety of coffee beans, but also for producing top-notch beans. In fact, a law passed in 1989 prohibiting farmers from planting low-quality beans. Nothing like a good quality coffee to get the heart pumping. Number 7, adventure tourism. Speaking of blood pumping, do you love thrill-seeking adventure? Costa Rica might just be the place for you. With a plethora of adventurous activities, there's something for everyone. One popular activity is zip lining. Offered across the country, zip lines offer thrilling views of tropical rainforests and volcanoes. Similarly, Costa Rica offers waterfall rappelling where you can climb down beside waterfalls and take in spectacular views. You can also spend the day whitewater rafting on one of Costa Rica's many challenging rivers, or hang out by the sea to catch some awesome surfing waves. Not a fan of the water? Try a hike on an active volcano. Whatever adrenaline rush you're looking for, Costa Rica has something for you. Number 6, eco-friendliness. Climate change is no joke, but thankfully, Costa Rica is taking the initiative to protect the environment. With the goal to be carbon neutral by 2021, Costa Rica is a global leader in renewable energy. In fact, in 2016, the country ran on 100% renewable energy for 76 days straight. And in recent years, Costa Rica has generated about 98% of its electricity from renewable sources. The consistent rainfall during the rainy seasons allows hydroelectric plants to produce an abundance of energy, while geothermal resources make up for most of the country's energy needs. It's definitely a plus to vacation with a low carbon footprint. Number 5, natural beauty. Costa Rica has some of the most stunning natural beauty.
So this is an excellent example of communications, this idea that Costa Rica is promoting the experience, right? If you're into nature, you're into water, you're into jungles, then there's no better place to experience nature than Costa Rica. And this video does a really good job of essentially driving that point home. So number 2 was visual and verbal identity. Number 3, which was the product presence. So this idea of, especially the package, right? This idea of packaging. This is especially important for toys like LOL, or even if you think about perfumes, the packaging is really important. If you think about even the consoles, which we showed you last week's video, just unpackaging, taking out the console out of the package was a big deal. So the packaging is part of the experience. And number 4 was co-branding. So whether the co-branding is product placement, a sponsorship, a promotional tie-in, and so co-branding is a great way to elevate the importance or enhance the image of your brand, I should say. So a good example of this, the idea of co-branding, is Stranger Things and Universal Halloween Nights.
I'm nervous now. I hear stuff. I hear things going on back in there. That first Demogorgon, I'm not gonna lie, I was not planning this. I wasn't trying to be the center of attention. That you fell. No, that scared me.
No,
The Demogorgon! It's gonna come out the wall. Which way? This way? No! That's not me! That's the scariest thing here! You're not gonna scare me this time! It's the lab! It's the lab! It's the lab! Going into the gate was cool. Like that was like that claustrophobic feeling. I always pictured it being like that. This is so cool. We're going in.
And there was this one part where we were just kind of walking through complete darkness.
Darkness. Oh my God! Oh, this is our class. This is us. It's us. Oh my God! Dude, this is our scene. That's sick. Oh shoot! Oh shit! How many of them are there? That's the same thing. That was good. That was pretty good.
So scary.
So again, this is a great co-branding between a very popular television show, right? Stranger Things on Netflix, as well as Universal's Halloween Horror Nights. And so it's a great tie-in between really the special event that happens at Universal Studios, as well as with this popular show. And in a lot of ways, right, the fact that they were able to utilize or create this tie-in with that very popular show kind of might give it a little bit of an advantage over, let's say, Not Scary Farm, because Not Scary Farm is the big competitor with Universal's Halloween Horror Night during that time. And certainly these kids, right, if you think about it, they're influencers to a certain degree, depending on the demographics. But certainly for their peers, they certainly are influencers when it comes to their peers. And so this could give Universal Horror Nights an advantage over, let's say, Not Scary Farm by utilizing the cast of Stranger Things. So number 5. So number 5 would be spatial. Spatial. So think about buildings, offices, retail, public spaces, trade booths. We're talking about a spatial environment. And so the idea is that you can create something really cool with your building, right? This idea of a spatial environment. So for instance, I think it was Chicago, maybe New York, I can't remember exactly, but you could literally buy a pair of Nikes, and um, then they had like a basketball court right adjacent to the store. So essentially, you can buy your pair of Nikes, your pair of Jordans, right, and go right next door, like well, right next to the to the place where you're buying the shoes and go play basketball. And so that's super cool. This idea of spatial environment. Oh, good point, Rihanna, about vans. I didn't really even. That's even a better example. The idea that you can actually um, go to a skate park while you buy after you buy your Vans, and uh, and try on your new Vans as you're skating, because obviously if you think about the origins of Vans, it starts with skating culture. um, so number 6 is websites and electronic media. This idea of developing entertaining and relating to customers. And so ESPN for me is, at least for me, is really good because I don't, it's hard to keep up with sports. And so whenever I go onto the website, I can catch up on important sporting events or sporting news. I'm able to interact with the videos and engage. And it keeps me on the page for a significant amount of time. And so developing these entertaining websites, right, that keep you on the site for a significant amount of time is really important. It's part of the experience. And then last but not least, people, right? Salespeople, customer reps, service providers, everyone associated with the brand, people are important. They're part of the experience. So you can do everything well, right, in terms of creating this great experience. But if the salesperson or the customer service is poor, it's which is part of the experience, it can ruin it. And you're gonna certainly tell your friends that customer service was poor. Don't go to this business or don't buy this brand. And so a person can create a negative word of mouth by complaining about the people. So the people, right, are a very important part of the experience and have to provide good customer service to keep people coming back to enjoy the experience. All right, so customers are rational and emotional. Notice that I'm saying essentially two different things here. That we're rational, in other words, logical, but we're also emotional, which is the opposite of rational. So customers may frequently engage in rational choice. They are just frequently driven by emotions because these consumption experiences are often directed towards the pursuit of fantasies, feelings, and fun, right? And so, yes, we're logical and we want to make the rational choice, but sometimes our emotions get the better of us, right? And so, therefore, we're no longer acting rational. We're acting more, emotional because we want to feel a certain thing. And so, yes, customers are rational for the most part, but they also want to be entertained. They want to be stimulated. They want to be emotionally affected and creatively challenged. And so, because they're pursuing these things, they want to experience these things, they may actually have negative consequences for, let's say, the environment, for instance. So, here's a clip of what I'm talking about.
Is tourism destroying cities? Residents of some of the most beautiful cities around the world have been protesting against tourism, and there has been anti-tourist violence in places like Barcelona and Venice. But why? There are 4 ways that tourism can affect cities: overcrowding, pollution, bad behavior, and rising prices. Let's begin with overcrowding. Venice, a city of 60,000 people, welcomes nearly 30 million visitors a year. That's 76,000 tourists a day. Spain had 82 million visitors in 2017, with 9 million visiting Barcelona alone. There are even traffic jams climbing Mount Everest now. Overcrowding has an obvious effect on traffic, footpaths, and queues. It can also affect a city's culture and identity, like in Barcelona, where locals are complaining tourism is diluting its vibrancy and history. Tourists also bring with them pollution and waste. They consume heaps of water and food, while causing environmental damage to the destination. In Thailand, a beach has been closed to protect its coral reefs from tourists. In Indonesia, Bali's famously pristine beaches are now being swamped by garbage. and their underground water sources are being drained too quickly. The island predicts it will run out of its water supply by 2020. In Venice, cruise ships that bring thousands of tourists each day are damaging the local environment with engine pollution and water displacement. Tourism even accounts for 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, mainly from transportation. And then there's the issue of tourists' bad behavior. There are many viral videos that show tourists behaving inappropriately, from airport check-in meltdowns and assaults on cabin crews to deliberately damaging ancient ruins. Locals in the Brazilian city of Rio de Janeiro are furious at drunk tourists at their infamous Ipanema beach. In Croatia, people are fed up with loud and rude tourists, so fines are being issued to those who drink alcohol in public. And Bali is even considering imposing restrictions on temples after tourists continue to climb on the holy sites or pose in swimwear. Finally, tourism causes a rise in prices, especially when it comes to short-term rentals. Like with Airbnb, an accommodation app where users can share their homes with tourists. It has grown enormously with over 5 million lodgings across 81,000 cities. But it has its downsides. Landlords in major cities make more money out of short-term leases on Airbnb, forcing local tenants to pay more. In some cities, it can raise housing prices as people look to invest in Airbnb homes. These rising prices are not just limited to Airbnb though. In Cambodia, citizens were evicted from fishing villages so that resorts could be built on the beaches. The increased cost of living is forcing residents out from some of the most beautiful cities in the world. But there is hope. Cities are starting to recognize the impacts of mass tourism and are looking to introduce measures to deal with the load. Fines for behavior are being introduced in cities all over the world. Regulations are starting to hit Airbnb, with their listings in San Francisco, Barcelona, and Paris dropping. Iceland and Greece are instituting caps on arrivals. Venice is planning to divert massive cruise liners to reduce some of the environmental damage. And growing recognition of over-tourism could push visitors into more environmentally and culturally friendly tourism, in an attempt to save some of these delicate sites for generations to come.
So again, right, if you think about it, yes, we are rational, right, but we're also emotional. And this idea, or this quest for exploring and touching and feeling and those sorts of things also has some negative consequences to it, especially to our environment, right? So another example, which they kind of touched on a little bit when they were talking about Nepal and the Himalayas, there's heaps and heaps of garbage that are on the Himalayas because when people stop to camp, right, they're leaving the garbage behind. And so it's changing and affecting our climate in a very significant way. One of the things that's happening in the Himalayas, for instance, because of, this is not to freak you out or gross you out or anything like that, but they're starting to discover bodies that people who died on the Himalayas, right, as more and more ice begins to melt, it's starting to uncover people who are actually entombed in ice. And now they're becoming more visible because I don't know if you guys know this or not, but if you die on the Himalayas, that's it. They're not bringing you down. It's too taxing on the body, on the human body to try to bring you down. So essentially, if you die on the Himalayas, you stay on the Himalayas. And yes, this would be over tourism. So this is the downside of experiential marketing, is this idea that, some places do such a great job of promoting their experience, right, that they actually create a problem, and that problem would be over tourism. The fact that people want to explore these places, these, virginal places or places that are not been explored by most people, and they impact nature in a very negative way. Question? So methods and tools are eclectic. And what I mean by that is research. How is research conducted? in terms of like trying to figure out what people like. In other words, what's going to get somebody to travel to a certain location. And this is the reason why research is important, right? It's critical to the success because an organization has to understand its target audience. And really, you can only understand your target audience through doing research. And and so you need to understand, what makes a person click. You need to understand, what a target audience's likes, dislikes, their intelligence, their emotions, all those sorts of things. And you can only glean that out or get that out through research. And so that's why it's important to do research on your target audience. And so one thing that's important about this idea of research, they're not tied to a specific methodology. And if you've ever taken research methods, right, the two primary research methods is in terms of quantitative, where you do measurements, and then there's qualitative, which is more nuanced, where you use focus groups and you talk to people. You may also use what they call ethnographies. So ethnographies means that you live with the culture and you live with those individuals to kind of get an understanding of them. That tends to be more of a qualitative type of study. Qualitative takes a long time to gather. Quantitative you can do very quickly. And so depending on what the objective is, right, you can dictate the methodology. So if you figure out, okay, what are the three favorite things that people like to do when they're in Costa Rica, you can do that very quickly through a quantitative study. But you can just ask them a series of questions and you can come up with that very quickly. But if you want more nuanced things, then, then that's going to take qualitative. So quantitative, quick, qualitative, slow. And so the objective dictates the methodology. Do you want your information quickly, or do you want your information to be more drawn out and more, some would say perhaps a little more correct? So after you collect the research, right, the whole objective is delivering a desirable customer experience. And so you're using all sorts of things at your disposal, right, with experiential marketing. Using obviously information technology or data about your target audience. You obviously are using branding, which we already talked about. You're using integrated marketing campaigns, which we already sort of discussed, right? The idea of using PR, advertising, people, all sorts of things, as well as you're using entertainment. So, and what I mean by entertainment is you can use movies, television programs, to essentially create a positive buzz about the experience they're going to have in that particular location. So, as you see here, right, the purpose is to generate brand awareness and again, brand loyalty, because brand loyalty is really, at the end of the day, the one that's going to trigger the purchase in a lively and engaging manner that reflects the brand image and values, and it's an entertaining way of putting the product or service in the public eye, right? Because part of the experiential marketing, what's going to help you stand out from all your other competitors, is that this experience is going to be unique. And if you're this particular type of person, this is going to be an experience that should be on your bucket list, and that, it's something that it's a must if you are this particular type of person. So for instance, if you're really into nature, you must go and explore, right, Costa Rica, for instance. So any questions regarding experiential marketing? Okay, so moving on. Now this part, folks, is really important for the person who's doing the 4 Ps, and it's also really important for the person who's doing the analysis at the end. So that analysis where I talk about, okay, what were some things I did well and things that they didn't do well. So as we discussed in the past already, is that no campaign is perfect, right? Humans are imperfect. So we're always striving to do better, and we're always striving to be better than the last time we did it. But we're never going to reach perfection. That, it's a goal, something to strive for, but it's never really going to happen per se. You can come close to it, never perfect. Anyways, so when you're looking at a campaign, you got to think about, okay, if they did a publicity campaign, what were the strengths and what are the weaknesses of doing a publicity campaign or PR campaign? So was there some sort of crisis communication that happened? In other words, did the star get into trouble? Let's say the star got arrested or something about the star's past comes out. So did PR do a good job of covering that up? In other words, this idea of elevate corporate or brand image, did they maintain a positive position despite the fact this spokesperson got into trouble by either contacting the customer directly or by handling any negative publicity quickly? In other words, did they have a crisis communication plan in place to deal with this problem? And did they do it effectively? I guess that's the biggest question here. Number two, it's a well-developed interactive relationship with the target audience. So anytime you have a PR campaign, there's lots of outlets, right? Media, which I should say newspapers, talk shows, magazines, those sorts of things, where you can reach the audience and you can tailor the message in to a very specific audience very effectively. And down here, low cost. PR is essentially free, right? It's not like it's advertising, which you have to pay for. So social media, right? If you do a good job with your social media, can be free or low cost. Nice write-ups about your movie or your star or your book are free essentially. Interviews with various talk show hosts essentially are free. You're doing that talk show a favor and they're doing you a solid as well. So weaknesses of PR. It's a short shelf life of news items. So what happens in today's modern day news cycle is that you're only in the news for 24 hours and then you're gone. Unless, your star keeps making mistakes. In other words, they made a mistake and they keep making more mistakes. And then it becomes a longer than 24-hour news cycle. For example, I know most of you have heard of the firing of the actress, The Mandalorian. Apparently, she had been warned. Apparently, there's a code of conduct, and so she had been warned about staying off of social media. And so the reason being is because I'm sure the Disney folks knew that. Okay, well, she made a mistake on social media. It's gonna be gone in 24 hours because other news was gonna pop up. But no, she kept on talking. She kept on being on social media, and so she kept on being in the public eye. And so this is one of the reasons. Well, so she says, or so I've heard, that she gets fired. Another example of bad PR: somebody just always staying in the news cycle in a negative way. And I know some of you are thinking to yourself, well, but they're in the news. If they're mentioning you, it must be a good thing. Well, generally speaking, yes, but sometimes no. So Charlie Sheen, for instance, is another example who stayed in the news cycle way too long by doing crazy things on social media and got himself into trouble and eventually got himself fired from Two and a Half Men, right? Where he was like the highest paid actor at the time, and I think he was on the most popular TV show at the time, but he just couldn't stay off social media and eventually ended up getting fired from the show. So PR has difficult to modify behavior. It has limited reach. So it only reaches a certain number of people. It doesn't necessarily reach a mass audience. So limited reach, meaning that it doesn't reach a mass audience. It has a limited reach. It only reaches a certain number of folks. In other words, right, it only reaches the folks who watch that interview. It only reaches the folks who are who read that Twitter or that meme or whatever, that watched that interview, read that article. Also, there's no ROI. In other words, return on investment. It's really difficult to measure results for PR, right? There's really very difficult to measure, like box office or sales, through PR only. Very, very difficult. And the reason being is because PR doesn't outwardly tell you to do, right? That's the weakness of PR. Going back to thinking, feeling, and doing. PR really just, tells you to think a certain way, maybe feel a certain way, but it doesn't really tell you to do. Last but not least is a poor or vague interview. So in this particular case, right, you set up an interview with a talk show host, and essentially the celebrity or the actor or whoever is supposed to be there to promote the show or the movie doesn't end up promoting the show or the movie. If anything, it ends up being confusing to the viewer and maybe even to the talk show host, I suppose, on some level. Anyways, here's some examples of some terrible interviews.
Be prepared for a lot of awkwardness. Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 most confrontational talk show moments. For this list, we'll be looking at the most confrontational talk show moments. To qualify, the moment must be genuine in some way, so staged confrontations like Jerry Lawler's fight with Andy Kaufman on David Letterman will not be considered.
We're going to pause here for station identification, get the hose out here.
And while R. Kelly's interview with Gayle King on CBS This Morning is infamous, it will not be included either, as the focus is solely on talk shows.
How stupid would I be to do that?
I didn't say you were holding...
That's stupid, guys!
I didn't...
Is this camera on me?
Yes, it's on.
That's stupid! Use your common sense. Don't forget the blogs. Forget how you feel about me. Hate me if you want to, love me if you want, but just use your common sense. How stupid would it be for me to, with my crazy past and what I've been through?
Number 10, Dakota's birthday, The Ellen DeGeneres Show. Ellen DeGeneres is rarely caught off guard by any of her guests, which makes this particularly awkward exchange with Dakota Johnson all that more captivating.
It's good to see you. Happy belated birthday. When was your birthday?
It was October 4th.
October 4th. You turned 30.
I did.
And how was the party? I wasn't invited.
After inquiring about the actress's birthday party, Ellen made the mistake of mentioning that she was not invited. A throwaway joke that ended up not being true, a fact Johnson wasted absolutely no time in correcting.
Actually, no, that's not the truth, Ellen. You were invited. Last time I was on the show, last year, you gave me a bunch of shit about not inviting you, but I didn't even know you wanted to be invited.
Well, who doesn't want to be invited to a party?
Well, I didn't even know you liked me.
Ellen's comedic timing does manage to diffuse some of the tension out of the situation, although that does not make the interview's opening few minutes any less uncomfortable to watch.
Ask everybody. Ask Jonathan, your producer. Who said you were?
I was invited? Right. Why didn't I go?
I don't know.
Was it? Oh yeah, I had that thing.
Number 9, Norman Mailer versus Gore Vidal, The Dick Cavett Show.
I'd really like to get into a discussion with Gore. He's been saying absolutely unspeakable things about me. He's been acting even worse than he usually does as a polemicist. He's really he's shameless in intellectual argument. He's absolutely without character, a moral foundation, or even intellectual substance.
The Dick Cavett Show had its share of explosive sessions over the years, but few compare to the sheer ferocity that defined Norman Mailer and Gore Vidal's segment.
Norman did a book on women's liberation.
Mm-hmm.
And his attitudes towards sex, some very interesting, some quite outrageous. He was very anti-women's liberation piece, and he was very mean to a couple of the girls, particularly Kate Millett. And I answered his piece, and a number of others. Norman is taking everything too personally.
While everyone got their licks in, Mailer was the driving force behind this confrontational debate, with the writer mocking Vidal's career, personality, and pretty much everything besides his political campaign.
I guarantee you I wouldn't hit any of the people here because they are smaller.
In what ways?
Intellectually smaller.
Well, let me turn my chair and join these three. Perhaps you'd like 2 more chairs to contain your giant intellect.
Mailer even challenged Cavett and the audience's intelligence, while a bored Janet Flanner sat there like a frustrated teacher presiding over a couple of school children. While things never quite got violent on screen, Mailer reportedly headbutted Vidal earlier that night.
Hey, can I talk to the audience for a moment?
Why don't you fold it 5 ways and put it where the moon don't shine?
Number 8. Vince McMahon versus Bob Costas. On the record with Bob Costas.
Vince McMahon, thanks for coming, Vince.
Pleasure.
XFL ratings are down 75% from week 1. They now rival the lowest ratings ever in prime time, not just for a sports program, but for any television show.
Right.
Can you guarantee me right now that there will be a year 2 for the XFL?
While some discussions start gently and gradually grow more confrontational, Bob Costa's interview with WWE's Vince McMahon is underpinned by a palpable fierceness right from the start.
But in most people's minds, not with prestige because of the type of programming you're associated with. On the other hand, NBC has prestige.
Right.
They risk not just dollars, they risked prestige.
Coming across more like an interrogation than a discussion, Costas grilled his guest on the failings of the XFL, a then new football league created by McMahon that would ultimately go bust within a year of debuting, while also not painting professional wrestling in the most positive light.
You want to let me finish here for a second, pal?
I'm asking you the question.
Then shut your mouth and let me answer the question, all right? I'll be happy to answer. Let me finish.
By the time the interview came to an end, McMahon appeared on the verge of body slamming the host, although the pair would meet up for a much more cordial episode a year later. Number 7. Morton Downey Jr. versus Seika.
There's some good examples of interviews gone awry. Of course, you saw the image. There's Tom Cruise, the famous Tom Cruise interview where he's supposed to be interviewing, I think it's not Mission Impossible, it's War of the Worlds, and ends up going sideways, talking about different things. I think they end up talking about Brooke Shields and her using some sort of medication, but that's an example of just interviews gone awry. So, print media. So, if your campaign utilized print media, some good things about print media is the fact that it's geographically concentrated. So, in other words, if you're doing any sort of print media, say the Los Angeles Times, it's geographically concentrated in the Los Angeles area. Or if you do any sort of print advertising with the Orange County Register, it's geographically concentrated to Orange County. So that is a strength, especially if you're doing an event in Orange County, or if you're doing an event in Los Angeles, then you can reach potentially a lot of folks in that geographic area. Loyal readers. So something about print media, whether it's magazines or whether it's newspapers, is that it has loyal readers. People who do read the newspaper or magazines tend to read them quite often. So there are a lot of loyal readers. Cost. So cost is generally fairly inexpensive for newspapers, mind you. Now, that being said, for magazines, they're a lot more expensive for magazines, but for newspapers, they are cheaper. Magazines more expensive. Short deadlines for newspapers. So one of the great things about newspaper advertising is that you can essentially call the newspaper up the day before your event or 48 hours before your event and say, hey, and if you have a slick, by the way, which is a copy of your advertisement the night before, you can basically call the newspaper and say, hey, I want to place an ad. I want to place it in this particular section. I want it to be a specific size. And that advertisement will appear in the newspaper the following day if you're prepared. So short deadlines for newspapers, not so short for magazines. The great thing about print media is it has various sizes. You can do quarter page, an eighth of a page, half a page, a full page if you want. So it has various sizes. And lifespan, uh, not necessarily for newspapers, because generally for newspapers, if you get a newspaper, you throw it away the next day. But for magazines, they tend, especially if it's a monthly magazine or a weekly magazine, that reader is going to hold on to that copy of that magazine for a long period of time. So it's possible of being able to reach a large number of people over time with that advertisement. The bad side, the weakness of any sort of print media, it's the least targetable of the mass media, especially the newspaper. So again, least targetable of all the mass medias because you don't know who's going to be reading the newspaper. Lengthy deadlines, especially for a magazine. I mean, especially for magazines. So for a magazine, let's just say you wanted to print an advertisement that comes out, let's say in April. So by now, you probably should have your stuff, or at least by next week, you should have all your information, everything you want, sent to the magazine so they can place that advertisement into the magazine. So you got to work months, if not weeks in advance to get your information into the magazine. And you got to make sure that that advertisement in that magazine is working in sync with radio spots, with billboards, with television advertisement, all those sorts of things. Number 3, creative disability. So one thing about color for newspapers, the color in newspapers is terrible. I mean, they can give you colored ads, but the colored ads is just not great. So the quality of the color is pretty poor. The quality of the advertisement can look poor on paper, even though you spent a lot of time creating this slick advertisement. As soon as you place it on paper, it just doesn't translate well. Clutter. So one of the terrible things about newspaper, of course, is that oftentimes we pick and choose the section that we want to read. And so there's a lot of information in the newspaper, and you might just read the sports section. And so in that case, you're going to miss all the other advertisements and all the other sections. And so because there's lots of ads and because there's lots of information in the newspaper, it's very easy for you to miss an advertisement in a newspaper. And of course, stating the obvious, especially for you younger folks, declining readership, right? Really, print media is really only good, especially newspapers, if you're trying to target an audience that tends to be older, right? You younger folks, especially if you're under the age of 30, you're really not, reading a traditional newspaper anymore. Maybe you read an online newspaper, but the idea of print media is, especially for younger folks, going away. Any questions on print media and the weakness of print media? So one of the strengths of television advertising, especially since cable television came along, because you can't really say this about network TV too much, but you can definitely say this about cable TV, is that cable TV, one of the strengths is that it developed content for different audiences, right? Whether it was Lifetime, it's more targeting female viewers, whether it's ESPN, which targets more sports fans, whether it is the idea of Nickelodeon, right, targeting children. So there's all these different channels out there, right, that target very small slivers of an audience. And so because of that, you're able to target um, very well the type of audience that you're trying to reach. So in other words, if you're looking for sports fans that okay, ESPN, I know if I place my ad on ESPN, there's a good chance that a lot of sports fans are going to watch my advertisement. So targeting, especially since the advent of cable TV, is a strength of TV advertising. The other strength of TV advertising, especially the networks, is the ability that it still reaches lots of people. So I know a lot of you are cord cutting and those sorts of things, or maybe you're in cord nevers, but network television still attracts the biggest audience out there. And so if you put your ad on a popular television show, especially network television show, you can reach a large number of people very quickly. Number three, trends and fads. So TV, at least historically, and even some still today to a certain extent, helps to set trends or influences the way we look or we talk. So it also, unfortunately, we tend to believe what we see, right? This idea that we see little snippets of information, we tend to believe it, right? Even though we argue over and over again, especially if you're comm students, hey, don't see what you believe. You should be a little more critical. But guess what? Most of us people don't take media literacy classes, and so we tend to believe what we see on screen, which makes it very impactful. And so any sort of TV advertising is very powerful because it can set trends or it can start a fad. So fad, right? What I mean by a fad generally means it only happens, it's only popular for a short period of time and then it's over. It's a fad. Trends tend to last a little bit longer. So costs, the downside of TV advertising, any sort of TV advertising, is it is really expensive. It is immensely expensive to promote anything on television, especially network television. Very, very expensive. So that's a cost, especially if you're operating on a limited budget. Clutter. So there's lots of advertisements. And so it's very difficult for your commercial, unless it's phenomenal, to stand out in the marketplace when you're competing with all these different ads out there. And number three, most of you, and obviously especially if you're a younger person, but really anybody who's watching TV, as soon as your programming ends, boom, programming ends after 15 minutes, oh, okay, it's time for me to grab something from the refrigerator. It's time for me to use the restroom. It's time to get on my phone and talk to my friends. So what ends up happening with a lot of TV ads is that number one, people tune out. We just blank out on advertisements or ignore and or forget, because how many times does it take for us to actually remember an advertisement? Does anybody know? Actually, yes, very good. Willa and Tino and Devin, you're actually right. For most people, actually, it's between 3 to 5 times of seeing an advertisement before we actually can recall what we actually seen. So think about the expense. You have to watch that advertisement at least 3 to 5 times before we remember it for recall. The one exception to the rule when it comes to this is the famous, I don't know if you guys remember, you guys are too young, but there's a famous ad done by Apple when they introduced the Apple computer. That's the one exception where it only ran, I think, one time on television, but because it was such a powerful advertisement, people actually remembered that ad. And some of my advertising colleagues think it's probably the best ad ever created for in history of advertising, or at least one of the best ads. And it might be one of the better ads that we've ever seen. If you've ever seen that advertisement where they in 1984 during the Super Bowl they promoted the Apple computer. And so radio advertisement. So if they did any sort of a radio advertisement, your IMC, your case study. Number one, the great thing about radio advertisement is it's inexpensive. So as somebody who used to work in radio, it is really inexpensive, even for the more popular stations, to run an advertisement on that radio station. Targeting. So just like television, especially cable television, radio, now that radio is no longer really trying to target a mass audience, really if you think about radio programming nowadays, most of the time they're trying to target very small narrow audiences. So for instance, K Rock, for instance, is targeting a very specific group. If you think about Jack 93.1, Jack FM, it's targeting a very specific group, generally speaking, older, right? They tend to be targeting older millennials or Gen Xers, maybe a little bit younger baby boomers, I suppose, for Gen X. Must I say boomers for Jack? And so, because these radio formats are targeting very specific groups, it now becomes again very easy to target your station that you want to advertise on by just identifying, okay, which target, who listens to this music, and so you can run your commercial on that station. So portable. So one of the great things about radio, especially now that you can listen to the radio on your phone, but even before then, when you had the Walkman and things like that, the radio is very portable. You can move the radio, you can walk around with the radio. And so it increases the likelihood that you're actually going to hear that advertisement because you're moving the radio around. Quick turnaround. As somebody who used to work again in radio, I actually produced the radio spots for 99.1 KGGI way back in the day. So I would make the ad so you would get essentially a sense of what they want you to advertise, sort of a script or at least a loose script, and you would write a script for them, and then when you get one of the disc jockeys to voice the script for you. So the point being is that this can be done very quickly. You can easily write a quick script, and you can easily get a disc jockey to voice the lines, and you can get that commercial done in 24 hours. It's very quick, very easy to get a radio spot up and running on a radio station. So interactivity. So one of the great things about advertising, at least on radio, is this idea of interactivity. So you can create a radio, let's say a radio contest, right? Interactivity, where you can have people call in. And so this idea of people calling in, and if you call in and you're the fourth caller, you can win 4 free tickets to this particular movie, or you can get 4 free tickets to this concert. So this idea of creating a contest through calling in is this what I mean by interactivity. And last but not least is that you can easily adapt your advertisement to a local or a national audience based off of who is going to be listening to your station. So in other words, right, let's just say that you want to produce a Spanish language spot. It's very easy to take your script that's in English and translate it into Spanish or get it translated into Spanish where it's equally as effective. So this idea of local or national or even ethnic adaptability can be done very easily on radio. Now the weaknesses, background noise. So again, unless you're singing along to your favorite song on the radio, as soon as something goes on the radio or a commercial gets on the radio, you can tune out. In other words, my wife might be calling me. So oftentimes when I'm listening to the radio, I put my earplugs in so I don't have to hear my son cry sometimes to tune him out. But sometimes I have to change him or I have to grab a bottle or something. And so everything that was being said on the radio as I'm listening just got tuned out. So now the radio becomes background noise. Sound only. So because you're not utilizing all your senses, you're only utilizing your hearing. So the fact that you're only utilizing your hearing, it makes it more difficult to recall. So, this idea that, generally you want somebody to be writing down what you're saying with sound only, but it's very difficult to recall when it's sound only. So in other words, you're only going to remember it if you're sitting in a quiet place with no background noise. Fleeting, it's a fleeting message. Tell me how often you're listening to the radio. Those of you who do listen to the radio, I don't know how many of you still listen to the radio. But you're sitting in your car, you're listening to the radio, and they mention a phone number. Oh, call this number for for these tickets or for this insurance or whatever. And you're like, wait, what did it just say? Oh, and so there's no rewind when it comes to radio advertisements. It's a fleeting message. So that's a huge weakness. Fragmented audiences. So many radio stations have fragmented audiences, meaning that there's many radio stations out there that sound similar in terms of like what kind of music they play. Like for instance, when I was your age, when I was in college, I could close my eyes and I can think to myself, okay, that's Kiss FM music. That's K-Rock. That's Power 106. I can close my eyes and based off of the music they're playing, I can go, oh, that's K-Earth. That's this. But now, because of the fragmented audiences, you don't know what you're listening to. If I asked me to close my eyes, I would say, well, that could be Kiss. That could be K-Rock. I'm not really quite sure. So because of fragmented audiences, you now have to spend more money on advertising on the radio because there's a lot of overlap in terms of who's listening to what station. And clutter. There's lots of advertisements again out there, and the idea that your one particular ad is going to stand out in the marketplace that runs all sorts of ads is difficult to say the least. So one of the things that should be a common trend, especially for the person who's going to be critiquing the integrated marketing campaign, is the idea of clutter. So I keep saying this over and over again. It's very difficult for advertisements to stand out in a cluttered marketplace where we're being inundated by advertisements. So if you guys don't mention this, the person who's doing the evaluation, if you don't mention this when you're doing your evaluation, I'm going to mark you down because I keep saying this over and over again in this lecture. So guerrilla marketing. So one of the weak strengths of guerrilla marketing is it's a good way or a creative way of reaching your target audience. So it's a creative or a good way to reach your target audience, especially especially if your guerrilla campaign went viral. So again, it's a great way of reaching your target audience, especially if your campaign goes viral, which touches on number 3. So it could also be cheap. It's a very creative and inexpensive way to create an interesting event. So it could be cheap and it could be creative. Internet synergy. So if your campaign becomes a meme or it somehow gets posted onto the internet on social media, again, you can utilize the internet effective synergy to essentially reach a huge audience with your guerrilla marketing campaign. And last but not least, your target audience may find that guerrilla marketing campaign to be fun and engaging or cool. So those are the strengths of guerrilla marketing if your campaign utilizes any sort of guerrilla marketing. Now, the bad things about guerrilla marketing, it works slowly. So in other words, again, ROI, return on investment, you may not know, at least in the short term, if your guerrilla marketing campaign actually worked. What if it doesn't get picked up by the internet? In other words, maybe somebody that was there filming your guerrilla marketing campaign thought it was cool. They put it up on the YouTube or whatever, but let's just say that it got no traction on the internet. Again, going back to the idea of clutter. There's so many viral videos or just so many videos being uploaded onto YouTube. It's very easily that your cool campaign gets ignored because it got no traction on the internet. Brand dilution. So in this particular way, maybe your target audience thought your campaign was tacky, right? They didn't like it, and it hurt the brand on some level. And so in other words, in terms of brand image, your target audience just didn't like it, thought it was tacky. They're like, maybe I'm not a fan of your brand anymore. Anyways, examples of cool marketing campaigns that centered around guerrilla marketing.
This has got to be one of the greatest and funniest marketing pranks ever. The concept's simple. Somebody goes into a shop to get their phone fixed, and the proprietor installs an app that allows the phone's user to control the technology around them, exactly like Aiden does in Watch Dogs. The man then shows them how to unlock random cars, blow up streetlights, and even dispense money from an ATM, while it's definitely fake. The viral video still caught on and is sitting at over 20 million views on YouTube. That is what is known as successful.
You just experience what you can do in the upcoming video game Watch Dogs.
Number 5, Destiny fragrance. Destiny.
They've never seen anything like you.
What do you do when you can't legally advertise your product? You mask it with a fake advertisement, of course. Microsoft could not legally advertise that Destiny was coming to the Xbox One because Sony had secured an exclusivity deal with Activision. It's pretty stupid, I know. However, Microsoft thought up a quick solution. They advertised a new fragrance called Destiny and promoted it through their social sites, urging people to visit the website, destinyfragrance.com. Upon clicking, you were taken to a website wherein Bungie explained the situation and smugly declared, "We didn't have permission to run adverts for the game, so we didn't." Very cheeky, Bungie. Number 4, Lost Planet 2 in blocks of ice. Lost Planet 2.
These colonists came to be known as snow pirates.
There's nothing quite like smashing a gigantic block of ice in front of various businesses and passersby. I mean, how to look like an insane person 101. To promote Lost Planet 2, Capcom encased the game inside gigantic blocks of ice, which were scattered around various cities in the US. Upon breaking the ice and obtaining the case, fans received a code which allowed them access to the exclusive online beta. Yeah, it wasn't the full game, which is definitely disappointing, but hey, beta's kinda cool, right? Get it? Cool, cold, blocks of ice. Man, that game sucked, eh?
Leave the anchor to them. Keep moving.
Number 3, wine bottles on beaches. BioShock 2.
They're just plasmid ads.
The goodwill of the original BioShock all but guaranteed that some fans would be out in droves for its sequel. However, that didn't stop marketers from thinking up some ingenious tactics, including this one, which saw wine bottles from Rapture wash up on various beaches around the world. Bottles of Arcadia Merlot were scattered around the beach, and inside were posters advertising the game. While the posters were kinda lame, keeping the wine bottle as a souvenir would be kinda fun, right? Or you could just throw it up on eBay to get some cash, which a lot of people did too. I mean, this is assuming you didn't immediately smash it. We know who you are. Number 2, find a weather balloon. Mass Effect 3. If your game takes place in outer space, it's only sensible to send the game into space, right? Right. To promote the launch of Mass Effect 3, EA attached the game to numerous weather balloons and sent them off into the stratosphere, complete with HD cameras so viewers could watch its journey. Gamers who signed up for an EA Online account were able to track the balloons via GPS system. If you were one of the lucky few to find a copy, you were guaranteed early access to the game and were given various other souvenirs, including a hat, shirt, and water bottle. Now that's a good ending.
You guys have proven that true fan passion can overcome all obstacles.
Number 1, steal our game, Red Faction Guerrilla. You gotta be pretty ballsy to go through with this one. A number of locked cars were parked on the streets of London with multiple copies of Red Faction Guerrilla just sitting inside. So a sledgehammer was also located nearby, and the idea was to use it to break into the car and steal a copy of the game. While the concept's interesting, it actually has little to do with the game. THQ's PR manager explained that the game has the world's most realistic destruction engine, and as such they thought it would be a good idea to see how many citizens would destroy a car to get a copy of the game. It's a bit of a stretch, but come on, ballsy, right? Do you agree with our picks? Check out these other great clips from Watch Mojo and subscribe for.
So there's some cool ideas in terms of guerrilla marketing. So again, if you think about the strengths, it could be the target audience could have thought it was fun and engaged in this idea of breaking the windows just to get a copy of that video game. Of course, the target audience could have been like, that's tacky, the idea of like breaking a window, stealing a video game out of a car. That's ridiculous. So the positive thing about guerrilla marketing, doesn't cost a lot, can be effective if it becomes viral, but it could also backfire on you in terms of people might be turned off by your guerrilla marketing campaign. In other words, they may not know, right, that it's a marketing campaign. They might think you're really really breaking a window and really breaking into this car to take out video games. That's crazy. Anyway, some people like guerrilla marketing. I don't know. So, out of home or transit advertising. And really what I'm referring to here is billboards. And I'm also referring to bus. So if you've ever seen advertisements on buses or billboards, that's what I mean by out of home or transit advertising. So the strong part about out of home or billboards and transit advertising is that it's everywhere. So availability, you can see advertisements everywhere. Reach, you can reach a lot of people on a 24-hour basis. Think about how many people are actually driving by, let's say that billboard, or think about how many people that bus drives by, right? People in cars, that bus is driving by, people who are driving cars, people who are riding in buses, or people who are just walking down the street. So it can reach a lot of folks. Frequency, and I'm referring here to the billboards. So people on their way to work and people on their way to home can see these advertisements on billboards. So in other words, you can see the billboard twice a day. So there's a reason why, I don't know how many of you, when you were going to school, you drive on the 91 like I do. I drive on the 91 to and from work. And so they have these big billboards on the 91 freeway. I think it's I can't remember. I think it's in Buena Park. Anyways, so these billboards are there because they know that we're sitting in traffic if you're driving on the 91 to and from work. And so they place these billboards there and they run these advertisements because they know chances are we're gonna see these ads, about at least twice a day. demographic diversity. You don't know who is actually watching these advertisements. You're reaching a diverse type of person, right? In terms of race, ethnicity, age, also sorts of folks are reaching with this advertisement. Visual, especially if they're electronic, because nowadays they have these electronic billboards, which I really kind of like. They can be really visually attractive, and they can actually be really visually engaging. They're way better than the old-fashioned billboards. Although the old-fashioned billboards, at least when they're new, can be cool. Location. Most billboards are located in high traffic areas. Again, lots of reach. So if you can place your location in billboards, and at least strategically, you can actually reach a large number of folks. Fleeting. So people are driving, right? So it's not like we can sit there and pay attention to these billboards as we're driving. If you're paying attention to these billboards as we're driving, well, guess what? You can rear end somebody or run somebody over or whatever, right? So you can't really pay attention to these billboards, whether it's transit, whether it's the billboard advertisements. So hence they are fleeting. Maintenance. So especially with traditional billboards, you have to maintain these billboards over time. And so oftentimes when you're the advertiser, you have no control over the upkeeps of the billboards, whether they're traditional billboards or on the transit vehicle. So I don't know about you guys, but I live in an area where they have billboards, but there's also there's a gang element or just, I don't know, people put a lot of graffiti on billboards. And so the billboards, at least relatively close to where I live, are always getting painted over by graffiti. And so even though, right, obviously that company doesn't want their billboard painted over with graffiti, nevertheless, it's painted over by graffiti. And so on some level, some would say, even though it's not your fault, it reflects poorly on your company because some maintenance guy didn't come by to repair the damage, get rid of the graffiti. So there's that. Poor targetability. It's almost impossible to effectively reach your target audience with billboards because essentially you're reaching so many different types of people that you're only reaching, 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 6 people might be the target audience that you really want. So poor targetability. Clutter, again, as I keep saying over and over again, it's very difficult to stand out. It's very difficult to create a memorable advertisement in an environment where we're inundated with advertisements. And brevity, message brevity, because we're driving by this billboard, because this transit vehicle is going by you, we're going to recall very little of that advertisement. So besides just having a slogan or a logo or a headline or something, there's not much you can do with the billboard. It's limited in terms of the information that you can provide the reader because it's fleeting. It's going by it so fast. What time is it? It is 5 more minutes. Good. So internet, social media. So one of the great things about internet advertising, by the way, I'll get to this shortly, consumer centric. So it is a great PR tool, is great outlets for building or reinforcing brand loyalty. So you can create advertisements, social media advertisements, commercials that target your particular target audience very strategically. And it's really good at building brand loyalty, which again is at the end of the day the most important factor for repeat buying. Flexibility, you're able to access the internet 24 hours a day. So it is great when it comes to that. Interactivity, there's a lot of interactivity between the target audience and the seller. Direct communication, back and forth, between the consumer and the seller. This is great. You can very quickly provide your website or your URL or hashtags, which very effectively can be utilized to advertise your product. It's very easy. And especially for your younger folks, right? It can be very engaging because the consumer, right? That's one of the great things about social media is the consumer's opting in, right? It's opting into the exposure. So for social media, it can be very engaging, especially for a younger target audience like you guys and you ladies who are used to being targeted through social media. Now, the downside for social media, again, is clutter, right? This idea that there's lots of information on social media. It's very easy, or it can be very easy for your information to get lost on the internet. Word of mouth. The internet never sleeps, right? Social media never sleeps. And so while you're sleeping, right, overnight, all of a sudden, somebody may have said a lie about your particular product, right? And again, lies unfortunately spread a lot faster on the internet than the truth. That's one of the unfortunate things about the internet. Lies spread faster than the truth. So the customer's comments may result in a negative word of mouth, even if it's a lie. And so then this is spread while you're asleep, and so you need to be on social media essentially 24 hours a day, contesting, questioning these negative comments. So time intensively, going back to the word of mouth, the upkeep, this idea of maintenance, the idea that you have to monitor what people say on the internet nonstop. It is very labor intensive. This idea of saying that, you specialize in social media. Well, people who work in social media have to be up at all hours of the night monitoring social media. It is tough. Buttons. This applies to the website, especially for targeting older folks or maybe people who are not so computer savvy. The idea of buttons. Sometimes some websites are a little bit confusing to navigate. And so you want people to interact once they press the buttons, but they don't know that you're supposed to be pressing buttons or clicking this or clicking that. And so there may not be clear instructions for the website user. And so that prevents engagement on some level. And one thing that I haven't mentioned here, which all of you already sort of intuitively know in terms of a weakness when it comes to social media, is the idea of an influencer. And the negative side of social media when it comes to influencers is how much it costs. It is really expensive to hire a well-known influencer, social media influencer, to say nice things about your product. And so it can be really expensive to hire an influencer. So that's the weakness of social media is hiring this influencer, which could be quite expensive. And in many cases, when you hire an influencer, you don't really know this person, right? You're just kind of like going, well, this person is popular on social media, but you don't really know him or her. And so that person, at the end of the day could hurt your brand on some level. And so you have to make sure that you get a code of conduct contract signed with that influencer, and that influencer may not want to sign that contract. So that's, again, a downside of influencers. So it is 5:30. Any questions on internet advertising? So one last thing that I was going to show you before I say goodbye for the week. Please watch our video on Wednesday. Be finishing up this lecture, and I think I'll be talking about market research. I think that's next on the agenda. So I pay very close attention to this integrated marketing campaign that was created by Lionsgate for the Hunger Games.
In 2012, Lionsgate's The Hunger Games became a worldwide sensation. But in 2013, the studio forged a groundbreaking integrated marketing campaign to work in concert with traditional advertising to achieve even greater heights with The Hunger Games Catching Fire.
History was made here.
To light the spark, Lionsgate launched the first evolving logo in movie history, the four-note musical mnemonic, which accompanied the motion poster, then became the signature sound of the entire AV campaign, and even turned into popular cell phone ringtones. Always closely coordinating every level of media after the debut of the Catching Fire teaser.
It's my pleasure to introduce The Hunger Games Catching Fire.
Lionsgate teased out 11 character portraits over 5 days across 13 of the internet's most popular websites. Fans had to unlock clues to reveal each subsequent poster. The success of this key art rollout became an integral ongoing part of the campaign. As new posters continued to hit the marketplace in the months to follow, keeping interest burning, including a specialty one-sheet designed specifically for fans of the book, using one of their favorite quotes from the novel.
We have never seen anything like this.
With audiences craving more, Lionsgate went bold, creating an in-world digital fashion magazine called Capital Couture, inventing their own pop culture for a world enamored with glamour.
Chins up, smiles on.
The summer issue blurred the lines between fiction and reality, crossing over into high-profile billboards in New York and LA. And for the fall issue, Lionsgate partnered with CoverGirl to create an integrated marketing campaign of their own for their Capital collection of cosmetics, with in-world, outdoor, TV, print, and digital advertising all woven together. The excitement for Catching Fire was heating up.
Let it fly.
To ignite their final marketing phase, Lionsgate decided to reveal a look at the actual games for the first time in their global advertising during one of the biggest games in the world.
Here's the exclusive final trailer debut of The Hunger Games Catching Fire.
With new partners and new fans, the integrated marketing campaign successfully broadened the already massive franchise, making The Hunger Games Catching Fire the #1 movie of 2013 and the 10th biggest movie in history. But the franchise's growing popularity didn't stop there.
Caesar Flickerman here with Claudius Templesmith.
Hi. The successful campaign also elevated the motion picture event into one of the most iconic and beloved global cultural phenomenons of all time.
Please welcome Jennifer Lawrence.
Hunger Games hysteria.
The Hunger Games.
It's really caught on fire.
Okay, so is there any questions regarding strengths and weaknesses of campaigns? And again, this applies. This lecture is I'm directly talking to the folks who are doing the 4 Ps, people who are doing, I guess, the branding, the people who are doing the evaluation afterwards in terms of strengths and weaknesses. Anything has to do with tactics, so bear that in mind. Awesome. So please watch the video on that finishes up this part of the lecture on Wednesday. And again, we'll talk about market research. Next week, actually, we'll probably be more or less caught up. And so we'll talk about theories a little bit, but also answer any questions because the following week after that, you guys present. So a lot of things are happening very quickly. And then the week after that, you meet your client. If you have any questions regarding your case study, please let me know.